The smell of expensive Italian leather has a way of lingering in a room, heavy and unapologetic. I sat in my favorite floral armchair, the one my late husband David and I had picked out a decade ago, and stared across the coffee table at the source of that scent. It was a handbag. Not just any handbag, but a limited edition, buttery soft, slate gray designer tote that cost more than my first car. It belonged to my daughter-in-law, Jessica. She had casually dropped it there on my antique oak table like it was a cheap canvas grocery sack, completely oblivious to the bitter irony it represented in my living room. I am 65 years old. I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb in Ohio, in a 4-bedroom house that echoes a little too much these days. For most of my life, I believed that the defining characteristic of motherhood was boundless, unconditional sacrifice. You give and you give, and when you think your well has run completely dry, you dig your fingernails into the dirt and find a way to give a little more. But staring at that bag, a cold, hard realization washed over me. A realization that had been trying to surface for 5 agonizing years. There is a very fine, often invisible line between being a loving, supportive mother and being a complete, utter fool. And I, Eleanor, had crossed that line a long, long time ago. To understand how my family arrived at the edge of a total moral collapse, you have to understand the slow, insidious nature of financial manipulation. It never starts with a demand for your life savings. It starts with a sigh, a worried look over a cup of coffee, a casual mention of how the economy is squeezing the middle class. Matthew is my only child. He is 40 years old now, a man with broad shoulders and a smile that used to melt my heart instantly. When David passed away 7 years ago, Matthew became the center of my universe. So 5 years ago, when Matthew lost his mid-level management job during a round of corporate downsizing, my maternal instincts kicked in like a reflex. He was married to Jessica, and they had just welcomed my beautiful grandson, Leo, into the world. How could a grandmother sit back in her paid-off house, living comfortably on a generous pension and David's life insurance, while her flesh and blood struggled to buy formula? The first check I wrote was for $1,500. Just to cover their mortgage for the month, Matthew had said, his voice thick with shame. Just until I get back on my feet, Mom, I promise. I hugged him. I told him that was what family was for. I felt good about it. I felt needed. But the feet he was trying to get back onto kept slipping, or rather, the ground beneath them kept miraculously changing. Matthew found a new job 6 months later, but it paid slightly less. Suddenly, there was a gap that Grandma Eleanor was quietly expected to fill. It morphed from emergency mortgage assistance to covering their utility bills so the heat wouldn't be shut off in the dead of the Ohio winter. Then, it was covering the car insurance. Somewhere along the line, the nature of the emergencies shifted. The requests stopped being about survival and started being about maintaining a lifestyle they simply had not earned. I remember the day Jessica drove into my driveway in a brand new, top-of-the-line luxury SUV. The paint was so pristine it reflected the weeping willow in my front yard. I stood on the porch, wiping my hands on my apron, confused. Just 3 weeks prior, I had paid off a $4,000 credit card bill for them because Matthew claimed they were drowning in debt and couldn't sleep at night. "Oh, Eleanor, isn't it gorgeous?" Jessica had cooed, stepping out in her designer heels, holding little Leo on her hip. The lease on the old sedan was up, and with Leo getting bigger, we just had to upgrade for safety reasons. You know how important safety features are. Safety. That was the magic word. They weaponized my love for my grandson to justify their extravagance. Whenever I hesitated to open my checkbook, the conversation would inevitably loop back to Leo. We just want Leo to have a good start. We don't want Leo to live in a bad neighborhood. We want Leo to eat organic. Month after month, year after year, the withdrawals from my retirement accounts became a steady, bleeding rhythm. I was subsidizing their dinners at upscale bistros, their weekend getaways to Napa Valley, their endless stream of Amazon packages that piled up on their porch. I stopped buying new clothes for myself. I put off fixing the leaky roof in the guest bedroom. I canceled my own planned trip to Europe with my friends, citing health reasons, when the truth was that my travel fund had been quietly wired to Matthew to cover a mysterious tax issue he had neglected. I had become their personal, bottomless ATM. And the most heartbreaking part was that the more I gave, the less gratitude I received. The tearful, appreciative hugs from Matthew turned into quick, entitled texts. "Hey, Mom, rent is due Tuesday. Can you transfer the usual?" Thanks. Jessica stopped saying thank you altogether. My financial support was no longer viewed as a lifeline. It was factored into their monthly budget as a guaranteed stream of income. It was their right. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Sunday evening in late October. They had come over for dinner. I had spent all afternoon roasting a chicken, making Leo's favorite mashed potatoes from scratch, trying to create the warm family atmosphere I so desperately craved. Leo, now a bright, energetic 8-year-old, was upstairs playing with the vintage train set David had bought him. Matthew and Jessica sat at my dining table, sipping the expensive Merlot I had bought specifically for them. The atmosphere was unusually tense. Jessica kept shooting pointed glances at Matthew, silently urging him to speak. Finally, Matthew cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk to you about something important regarding Leo's future." My heart did a little flutter of panic. "Is he okay? Is he sick?" No, he's fine physically," Jessica jumped in, leaning forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the mahogany table. "But emotionally, intellectually, he's struggling, Eleanor. The public school system here is just failing him. The classes are too large, the teachers are uninspired, and frankly, the demographic of students isn't exactly pushing him to excel." I frowned. "Leo seems to love his school. He's always talking about his friends, and his report card was excellent." "That's because the standards are abysmally low." Jessica dismissed my comment with a wave of her hand. "We've been touring Wellington Academy. It's an elite private preparatory school. Small class sizes, advanced STEM programs, equestrian training. It's exactly the environment Leo needs to secure his path to an Ivy League college." Wellington Academy. I knew of it. It was where the neurosurgeons and corporate executives in the neighboring affluent counties sent their children. "That sounds wonderful," I said slowly, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I already knew where this was going. "But Wellington is incredibly expensive. It's $20,000 a year," Matthew said flatly. He didn't look me in the eye. He stared down at his wine glass. "And they require the first year's tuition up front to secure his spot for the spring semester. The deadline is next Friday." Silence fell over the dining room. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. $20,000. Up front. On top of the thousands I was already quietly bleeding out for their mortgage, their cars, their lifestyle. I thought about my last meeting with my financial advisor, a young man named Clark, who had looked at my dwindling portfolios with genuine alarm. "Eleanor," he had said, "if you continue withdrawing at this rate, your retirement funds will be depleted in less than 7 years. You will have nothing left for your own care if you get sick." I looked at my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the man who was now sitting in my house, casually asking me to sacrifice my remaining years of security so his wife could brag to her country club friends about her son's equestrian lessons. For the first time in 5 years, the fog of maternal obligation lifted, and I saw the situation with crystal clarity. If I wrote this check, I wasn't helping my grandson. I was financing my own future poverty. I took a deep breath. My hands were trembling under the table, so I clasped them tightly together in my lap. "I can't do it, Matthew." The words felt strange in my mouth. Foreign. Heavy. Jessica's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean you can't do it? Are your assets tied up? We can wait a few weeks if you need to liquidate some stocks." "No, Jessica," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. "I mean, I am not going to do it. I do not have $20,000 to spare for a private elementary school. My retirement savings are taking a severe hit. I've been happy to help you both through rough patches, but I have to start thinking about my own future. I can't be a financial burden to anyone if my health fails." Matthew finally looked up, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Mom, this is Leo we're talking about. Your only grandson. You're going to deny him a proper education over money?" "He is getting a proper education," I countered, feeling the heat rise in my own cheeks. "And it's not just money, Matthew. It's my survival. I pay your mortgage every other month. I paid off your credit cards. I cannot fund a luxury education on top of your living expenses." Jessica stood up so fast her chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. "Wow. Just wow. I told you, Matthew. I told you she didn't really care about Leo's future. She only cares about hoarding her money in this big empty house." "Jessica, that is incredibly unfair," I gasped, feeling tears sting the corners of my eyes. I love that boy more than life itself, but you two need to learn to live within your means." "Live within our means?" Matthew sneered, standing up to join his wife. The transformation in him was terrifying. Gone was the loving son. In his place stood a petulant, entitled stranger. "We are drowning, Mom. We are trying to give your grandson a decent life, and you're sitting on a gold mine, preaching to us about living within our means. Keep your money. We'll figure it out ourselves." "Matthew, please sit down. Let's talk about this rationally." "Get Leo," Jessica snapped at Matthew, grabbing her designer bag off the table. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "We're leaving. I'm not going to sit here and let my family be disrespected by someone so incredibly selfish." 10 minutes later, the front door slammed shut. I stood by the living room window, watching their luxury SUV back out of my driveway, the red taillights fading into the rainy night. The house was completely silent again. I thought they would cool down. I thought Matthew would call the next day, apologize for his temper, and we would find a compromise. I didn't realize that in saying no to their financial demands, I had unwittingly stripped away my only value to them. The punishment began immediately, and it was brutal in its efficiency. The next morning, I sent a text to Matthew asking if Leo got to school okay. Read 8:14 a.m. No reply. 3 days later, I called Jessica to ask if I could take Leo to the park on Saturday afternoon, a tradition we had kept for nearly 2 years. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message. Nobody called back. A week turned into 2. 2 weeks turned into a month. The silence from their end was deafening, a deliberate, calculated freeze-out designed to break my spirit. They knew exactly where my weak point was. My grandson. Thanksgiving came. For the first time in 40 years, I sat alone at my dining table. I had prepared a small turkey, hoping against hope that the doorbell would ring. It never did. I ate a slice of pie in the kitchen, crying so hard I couldn't breathe, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. Maybe I should have just sold some mutual funds. Maybe I should have just given them the $20,000. What good was money if it meant losing my family? By Christmas, the agony had settled into a dull, constant ache in my chest. I bought Leo a mountain of gifts, books, a telescope, clothes, and drove to their house on Christmas Eve. I stood on their porch, freezing in the snow, and rang the bell. Matthew opened the door. He stepped outside quickly, pulling the door shut behind him so I couldn't see inside. He looked tired, older, with dark circles under his eyes. "Mom, you shouldn't be here." "I brought presents for Leo," I said, my voice trembling, holding out the brightly wrapped boxes. "Please, Matthew, let me just see him for 5 minutes. Give him a hug. It's Christmas." Matthew looked at the boxes, then looked away, his jaw tight. "Jessica doesn't think it's a good idea right now. Leo's confused. He asks why Grandma doesn't want to help him go to his new school. We don't want to upset him further." The cruelty of the lie took my breath away. They had weaponized an 8-year-old, twisting my plea for financial sanity into a narrative of abandonment. "You told him that?" I whispered, horrified. "You told an 8-year-old child that I don't want to help him?" "We told him the truth, Mom," Matthew said coldly. "Leave the gifts. I'll make sure he gets them." He took the boxes from my shaking hands, turned his back on me, and went back inside, locking the door with a sharp click that echoed in the cold air. I drove home completely numb. January and February passed in a blur of gray winter days. The 3-month mark of being completely cut off from my grandson broke something fundamental inside of me. The desperate, weeping mother who would have done anything to win her son's favor slowly bled out, and in her place, a hollow, weary woman took up residence. I stopped staring at my phone. I stopped buying toys I couldn't give. I started going to therapy. My therapist, a wonderfully blunt woman named Dr. Evans, helped me see the dynamic for what it was: emotional blackmail. "They are starving you of affection to force your compliance," she had said. "If you give in now, Eleanor, you are teaching them that the price of their presence is your financial ruin." I knew she was right, but knowing it didn't make the house feel any less empty. I resigned myself to the fact that I had lost my son to his own greed and my grandson to my son's manipulation. I began the painful process of grieving the living. I reorganized my closets. I started reading again. I met with Arthur, my late husband's attorney and a dear friend, to update my will, quietly adjusting the terms of my estate to ensure my assets would be placed in an ironclad trust for Leo's education when he turned 18, entirely out of Matthew and Jessica's reach. I was finally finding a fragile sort of peace. The well was dry, but the earth around it was starting to heal. And then, in the middle of a dreary Tuesday in early March, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed a picture of Matthew and Leo from 3 years ago. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stared at the screen, my hand hovering over the accept button. After 3 months of absolute punishing silence, why was he calling now? I took a deep breath, steeling myself against whatever demand or accusation was about to come through the speaker, and swiped to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice remarkably steady. "Mom?" It was Matthew. But it wasn't the cold, entitled Matthew who had locked me out on Christmas Eve. His voice was thick, wet, and trembling. He sounded like the little boy who used to wake up from nightmares and run to my room. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He was crying, genuinely weeping. And just like that, the fragile walls I had built over the last 90 days began to crack. Because no matter how much they hurt you, no matter how much money they take, when your child cries, the mother in you always answers the call. I just didn't know yet that this call was the beginning of the most terrifying, dangerous week of my entire life. "Matthew?" I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I braced myself for the anger, the demands, the bitter accusations that had become the soundtrack of our rare interactions. But there was no anger, only the ragged, unmistakable sound of a grown man sobbing. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." My breath caught in my throat. Every defense mechanism my therapist and I had painstakingly built over the last 90 days completely evaporated. He sounded utterly broken. He sounded like the 7-year-old boy who had once fallen out of the neighbor's oak tree and fractured his wrist, crying for his mother to make the terrifying pain go away. "Matthew, sweetheart, what is it? Are you hurt? Is Leo okay?" The panic in my voice was instinctual, raw, and immediate. "Leo's fine. He's at school," Matthew choked out, sniffing loudly. "It's me, Mom. I'm a mess. I've been a terrible son. I don't know what happened to me. The stress, the money, Jessica. I just lost my mind. I was so angry that you wouldn't pay for the school, but I was really just angry at myself for being a failure." I closed my eyes, a single tear slipping down my cheek. "You are not a failure, Matthew." "I am," he insisted, his voice cracking. "And I punished you for it. I kept Leo away from you, the one person who has always been in his corner. He asks about you every single day, Mom. He drew a picture of you yesterday in art class, and when Jessica tried to put it in a drawer, he threw a tantrum and said he missed his Grandma Eleanor. It broke my heart. It woke me up. Hearing that my grandson had been asking for me, that he had drawn a picture of me, felt like a physical blow to my chest. The agonizing ice storm of the past 3 months began to thaw in the warmth of those words. This was all I had wanted. An acknowledgement, an apology, a bridge back to my family. "Oh, Matthew," I whispered, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "It's been so hard. I've missed you both so much. I've missed Leo. I know, Mom, I know. And I want to make it right. Jessica and I had a long talk last night. She realizes she was out of line, too. The private school was a ridiculous idea. We can't afford it, and it was unfair to put that on you." He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Look, I got a small bonus at work. It's not much, but it's enough to do something I should have done a long time ago. I want to take you on a trip. Just the 4 of us. A family bonding trip to reset everything." I blinked, genuinely surprised. "A trip? Matthew, you don't need to spend your bonus on me. You should save it." "No, Mom, I insist," he said, his tone shifting to one of desperate earnestness. "I found this beautiful, quiet resort down in Florida, right on the Gulf Coast. We rented a big family suite with a kitchen so we can cook together, and a pool for Leo. We leave this Saturday. Please, Mom, let me do this. Let me show you that we can be a family again without asking you for a dime. Please say yes." A trip to Florida. Sunshine. The beach. Cooking dinner with my son and watching my grandson splash in a pool. It sounded like an absolute dream. It sounded like the perfect antidote to the bleak, lonely Ohio winter I had just endured. A tiny voice in the back of my head, perhaps Dr. Evans's voice, whispered a note of caution. Isn't this a bit sudden? A bit extravagant for someone claiming to be broke? But the overwhelming, desperate hunger of a mother starved of her child shouted that tiny voice down. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. "Okay," I breathed out, a trembling smile forming on my lips. "Okay, Matthew. I'd love to go." "Thank you, Mom," he exhaled, sounding profoundly relieved. "Thank you. I'll come over tomorrow to help you prep your car. We'll take 2 cars so we have plenty of room for all of Leo's beach gear. I'll program the GPS and everything. I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart." When I hung up, I wept. I cried tears of profound relief. The nightmare was over. I had stood my ground, set my boundary, and endured the punishment. And the result was exactly what I had prayed for: respect, remorse, and reconciliation. I spent the next 3 days in a flurry of joyful preparation, packing my brightly colored summer blouses, buying a new swimsuit I hadn't needed in years, and picking up a brand new set of snorkeling gear for Leo. Saturday morning arrived, crisp and bright. I drove my reliable sedan over to Matthew and Jessica's house, my heart light and fluttering with anticipation. When I pulled into the driveway, Matthew was wrestling a massive cooler into the back of his luxury SUV. Leo was running around the front lawn with a plastic beach ball. When he saw my car, he stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes lighting up. "Grandma Eleanor!" he shrieked, sprinting toward me as I stepped out of the car. I dropped my purse and caught him in a fierce, breathless hug, burying my face in his hair. He smelled like maple syrup and little boy sweat. "Oh, my sweet boy," I murmured, holding him so tight I worried I might hurt him. "Grandma missed you so, so much." "I missed you too. Dad said we're going to the beach and you're going to build a sandcastle with me." "I absolutely am," I promised, fighting back happy tears. "Eleanor, you made it!" I looked up. Jessica was walking down the porch steps. She was wearing perfectly pressed linen trousers and oversized sunglasses, her blonde hair pulled back into a chic ponytail. She gave me a tight, practiced smile and wrapped her arms around my shoulders for a brief, incredibly stiff hug. It was the physical equivalent of a lukewarm glass of water, but I accepted it graciously. "I'm so glad we're doing this, Eleanor," Jessica said smoothly, adjusting her sunglasses. "It's time to put the past in the past. We have a long drive ahead of us, but the resort is going to be spectacular." "I can't wait," I said. Matthew walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. He looked jittery. His eyes were darting around, and he kept checking his Apple Watch. "All right, we need to get on the road if we want to beat the Atlanta traffic tomorrow. Mom, your car is ready? Oil checked? Tires good?" "Everything is perfect, Matthew. The mechanic looked at it on Thursday." "Great. I already synced your car's GPS to my phone and locked in the destination. You don't have to touch a thing, just follow the voice prompts. The route I picked avoids the major toll roads." "That's very thoughtful of you, dear," I said, opening my driver's side door. "Oh, wait!" Jessica called out, turning back toward the porch. She picked up something heavy and walked it over to my car. It was the bag. The same buttery soft slate gray designer leather tote that had sat on my coffee table the night everything fell apart. "Matthew completely overpacked our trunk with Leo's toys and the beach chairs," Jessica said, her tone light and conversational. "There is literally no room at my feet in the passenger seat. Do you mind keeping my personal bag in your car? It's just my expensive lotions, some bulky sweaters, and my makeup. I don't want it getting squished in the back of the SUV." "Of course not," I said easily. I reached out and took the bag by its thick leather straps. It was surprisingly heavy, practically sagging in the middle. "Goodness, Jessica, how much lotion do you need for a week?" I chuckled. Jessica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her eyes flicking toward Matthew. "You know me, Eleanor. I overpack. Just toss it on your passenger seat." I placed the heavy gray tote on the seat next to me, adjusting it so it wouldn't slide off if I had to brake hard. "I'll see you two on the interstate. Drive safe." The first 4 hours of the drive were peaceful. I trailed behind Matthew's SUV, keeping a safe distance. We merged onto I-75 South, joining the steady stream of weekend traffic. I listened to a classical music station, humming along, occasionally waving at Leo when he pressed his face against the back window of their car. Everything felt right. Everything felt normal. Around 1 p.m., my car's automated voice instructed me to take an upcoming exit, diverging from the main interstate. I frowned, glancing at the GPS screen on my dashboard. Matthew's SUV ahead of me kept going straight, its taillights fading into the distance. I reached for my phone, pressing the speed dial button for Matthew. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" He sounded breathless, like he had been running. "Matthew, the GPS just told me to exit, but you're still going straight on the interstate. Did the system glitch?" No, it's fine," he said quickly, his voice pitching up an octave. I forgot to tell you. My car needs premium gas and the station up ahead is out. I'm taking a slight detour to fuel up. You just stick to the GPS route. It's a shortcut through the state routes. We'll meet you at the resort's welcome center." "Are you sure? I can wait for you at a rest stop." "No." "Mom, don't stop. Just keep driving. It's fine. We'll be right behind you. Just follow the GPS." He hung up before I could say another word. I blinked at the phone, a strange, prickling sensation crawling up the back of my neck. Matthew was acting incredibly strange. He was a notorious micromanager. He would never normally separate our cars on a long road trip. And the urgency in his voice to keep me moving felt entirely disproportionate to a simple gas detour. I sighed and took the exit as the GPS commanded, merging onto a 2-lane state highway that cut through dense, Spanish moss-draped pine forests. The scenery shifted from busy commercial plazas to isolated stretches of rural land. The afternoon sun was beating down through the windshield. I reached over to the passenger side, blindly feeling around the console to grab a mint I kept in the little compartment next to the cup holders. My fingers brushed against the thick leather of Jessica's designer bag. As I pulled my hand back, my fingernail caught on a piece of paper wedged deep in the crevice between the passenger seat and the center console. I pulled it free. It was a trifold piece of standard printer paper, slightly crumpled. Matthew must have dropped it when he was leaning into my car to program the GPS that morning. I kept one eye on this empty road and used my thumb to flip the paper open against the steering wheel. I expected to see a printed itinerary for the Florida beach resort, a confirmation code, a list of local seafood restaurants. Instead, a bold black logo stared back at me. Oak Haven Restorative Care and Memory Facility, a secure environment for advanced cognitive decline. I frowned, my brain struggling to process the words. Why would Matthew have a brochure for a memory care facility? I glanced down at the paper again, reading the smaller print beneath the logo. It wasn't a brochure. It was an intake confirmation form. Patient name, Eleanor Hughes. Date of birth, April 12, 1961. Admitting guardian, Matthew Hughes. Power of attorney active. Intake date, Saturday, March 14th. Room assignment, Ward C, secure/restricted access. The air in my car suddenly felt violently cold. The breath vanished from my lungs. My hands began to shake so violently that the paper vibrated against the steering wheel. Saturday, March 14th. That was today. I stared at the address listed at the top of the form. 1144 Cypress Road, Oak Haven, Georgia. It was a remote county in southern Georgia, miles away from the Florida border. I looked up at my dashboard's GPS screen. The destination address scrolling across the digital display was 1144 Cypress Road. He wasn't sending me on a shortcut to a beach resort. He was navigating me directly to a locked psychiatric ward. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I gagged. The puzzle pieces from the last few days began crashing together with sickening clarity. The sudden apology, the insistence on taking 2 cars, the specific route he had pre-programmed into my dashboard so I wouldn't have to type it in and see the name of the destination. But why? Why a memory care facility? I didn't have dementia. I was perfectly healthy. I managed my own finances, drove my own car, and lived completely independently. You couldn't just lock a sane woman in a restricted ward without a doctor's evaluation and a mountain of legal paperwork. My eyes slowly drifted to the passenger seat, to the buttery soft slate gray designer tote sitting quietly beside me. There is literally no room at my feet. Do you mind keeping my personal bag in your car? It wasn't filled with expensive lotions or bulky sweaters. It was heavy, much heavier than clothes. Just as I reached my trembling hand toward the zipper of the bag, my phone erupted into ringing, shattering the silence in the car. I jumped in my seat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I glanced at the screen. Matthew. I hit the speakerphone button, keeping both hands gripping the steering wheel as I tried to control my breathing. Hello? Mom? His voice sounded completely different now. The breathless, jittery tone was gone. He sounded hollow, flat, sweating. Matthew, where are you? I managed to say, praying my voice wouldn't betray the sheer terror coursing through my veins. "I'm on the road. We're behind you," he said. He paused, the silence stretching out over the phone line. "Mom, that bag Jessica gave you. You have it, right?" "Yes," I whispered. "It's on the seat." Good. Just don't open it, okay? Jessica is really particular about her things. Just leave it zipped." He swallowed hard. I could hear the wet, nervous click of his throat through the phone. "Mom?" he said softly. "Yes?" "I love you, Mom. You know that, right? No matter what happens, you know I love you." He had never spoken to me like that in his entire adult life. It wasn't an expression of affection. It was a eulogy. It was a man saying goodbye to his mother's freedom, trying to absolve his own crushing guilt right before he dropped the guillotine on her life. "I know, Matthew," I said, my voice dropping to a dead, icy whisper. "I know exactly how much you love me." I pressed the red button on the steering wheel, cutting the call. The road ahead of me stretched out into the dense, isolating woods of Georgia. I was miles away from the interstate, miles away from civilization, driving myself straight into a cage my own son had built for me. I hit the brakes, pulling the sedan roughly onto the gravel shoulder of the highway. The car jerked to a halt, kicking up a cloud of white dust. I threw the gear shift into park. The engine idled, a low, steady hum in the deafening silence of the forest. I unbuckled my seatbelt. My hands were no longer shaking. A terrifying, absolute stillness had settled over my entire body. I turned to the passenger seat, reached out, and grabbed the zipper of Jessica's gray leather bag. The metal teeth of the zipper parted with a loud, raspy sound that seemed to echo in the confined space of the sedan. For a fleeting, desperate second, the mother in me still hoped to see a jumble of expensive cosmetics, rolled-up silk blouses, and oversized sunglasses. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to be just a paranoid, overly sensitive old woman who had misunderstood a simple piece of paper dropped on her floorboard. But as the heavy leather flaps fell open, the truth stared back at me, stark and undeniable. There were no clothes. There was no makeup. The designer tote was stuffed with thick manila legal folders. My breath hitched in my throat. My hands, which had been perfectly steady a moment before, began to tremble uncontrollably as I reached inside. I pulled out the first folder. It was surprisingly heavy, labeled in Jessica's neat, swirling handwriting. Financial/estate. I flipped it open, the heavy cardstock resting on my lap. The first document was a quitclaim deed. I stared at the bold print at the top of the page, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until I found the property description. It was the address of my home in Ohio, the home David and I had spent 30 years paying off, the home where we had brought Matthew back from the hospital as a newborn. According to this document, I was willingly and irrevocably transferring the sole ownership of my property to an LLC registered under Matthew and Jessica's names. I flipped to the last page. There, sitting neatly on the signature line, was my name, Eleanor Grace Hughes. It was a forgery. It was a damn good one, mimicking the slight rightward slant of my cursive, but it was absolutely a forgery. Attached to the deed was a bill of sale for my vehicle, the very car I was sitting in, and a consolidated transfer authorization for my retirement accounts, effectively emptying every single penny I had saved into a joint account controlled by my son. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. They weren't just sending me away, they were liquidating me. They were stripping me down to the bone, erasing a lifetime of hard work, saving and sacrifice, all so they could pay off their debts and maintain their country club lifestyle. I shoved the financial folder aside and grabbed the second one. It was labeled Medical/Guardianship. This was the one that made my blood run entirely cold. It was a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation stamped by a doctor, Eris Thorne in Atlanta, a man I had never met, spoken to, or even heard of in my 65 years of life. The evaluation read like a horror story about a stranger. Patient exhibits advanced stages of early-onset Alzheimer's disease. Patient displays aggressive paranoia, severe memory fragmentation, and an inability to manage basic hygiene or financial decisions. Patient is a danger to herself and requires immediate, permanent placement in a secure, restricted-access memory care facility. Attached to the doctor's fabricated evaluation was a court-certified durable power of attorney for healthcare and finances, granting Matthew absolute, unquestionable authority over my life, my body, and my money. It, too, bore my forged signature. The pieces of the last 3 months fell into place with a sickening, violent clarity. The Christmas Eve lockout, the refusal to let me see Leo, the sudden, agonizing radio silence. It hadn't been a childish tantrum over a private school tuition. It had been a calculated, premeditated strategy. They needed to establish a timeline of distance. If anyone asked why I was suddenly locked away in a Georgia psychiatric ward, Matthew would simply play the heartbroken son. Mom's mind has been going for months. She became paranoid. She cut herself off from us. We had to step in for her own safety. I sat in the sweltering heat of the parked car, the Georgia sun beating down through the windshield, and felt something inside me permanently shatter. It wasn't just my heart breaking. It was my entire identity as a mother. For 40 years, I had defined myself by my love for Matthew. I had forgiven his mistakes, bailed him out of his financial messes, and loved him with a blinding, absolute devotion that only a mother can understand. But the man who had orchestrated this, the man who had forged my name, paid off a corrupt doctor, and lured me onto a highway with the promise of seeing my grandson just so he could lock me in a cage and steal my home. That man was not my son. He was a monster wearing my son's face. A profound, suffocating grief washed over me. I wanted to curl up in the passenger seat, bury my face in my hands, and sob until my lungs gave out. I wanted to scream at the empty road, but as the tears threatened to spill, my eyes caught the reflection of my own face in the rearview mirror. I saw the deep lines around my eyes, the silver in my hair, the frightened, wide-eyed stare of an aging woman about to be thrown away like garbage. No. The word echoed in my mind, quiet at first, then roaring with a sudden, icy ferocity. No, you will not bury me alive. The grief evaporated, burned away in a fraction of a second by a blinding, absolute rage. It was a cold anger, precise and sharp as a scalpel. The weeping, desperate mother who had begged on a snowy porch on Christmas Eve was dead. In her place sat a woman who had survived the loss of her husband, managed a household, and navigated life's cruelties long before Matthew or Jessica had ever existed. I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. My hands had completely stopped shaking. I was operating on pure, crystalline adrenaline. I opened the camera app, Carefully, methodically, I began to photograph every single document in the folders. I made sure the lighting was clear. I captured the forged signatures, the fake medical diagnosis, the letterhead of the corrupt doctor, the deed to my house. I took over 40 pictures, making sure every terrifying detail of their conspiracy was safely backed up to my cloud storage. When I was finished, I neatly restacked the papers. I placed them back into the manila folders, slipped the folders back into the buttery soft leather of Jessica's designer tote, and zipped it shut. I adjusted the bag on the passenger seat so it looked exactly as it had when she placed it there. Now came the hardest part. I was trapped on a rural Georgia highway, less than an hour away from a locked facility. If I confronted Matthew now, if I screamed and accused them, what would stop him from physically forcing me into his SUV? What would stop them from dragging me into that ward, kicking and screaming, which would only perfectly validate the fake doctor's claim that I was aggressive and paranoid? I couldn't fight them with emotion. I had to fight them with strategy. I needed to get back to Ohio. I needed to get back to my jurisdiction, my house, and my lawyer. I took 3 long, deep breaths, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I closed my eyes, visualizing the loving, slightly anxious, compliant mother they expected me to be. I dug deep into myself to find that performance. Then I dialed Matthew's number. He answered on the first ring. "Mom? Are you okay? Why did you stop moving on the GPS?" His voice was tight, practically vibrating with nervous energy. I let out a ragged, shallow gasp, clutching the phone close to my mouth. "Matthew," I wheezed, making my voice sound thin and strained. "Mom? What is it? What's wrong?" "It's my chest, Matthew," I gasped, leaning forward over the steering wheel as if I were in physical agony. "There's a terrible pressure. It's radiating down my left arm. I had to pull over. I feel incredibly dizzy." "Oh my God," Matthew blurted out. I heard the muffled sound of him putting the phone on speaker, followed by Jessica's sharp voice in the background. "What's happening?" Jessica demanded. "Mom's having chest pains," Matthew said, panic leaking into his voice. "Mom, listen to me. Hold on. We're turning around right now. We'll be there in 5 minutes. I'm calling an ambulance." "No!" I cried out, injecting genuine panic into my voice. This was the critical pivot. If paramedics arrived, they would check my vitals, see I was perfectly fine, and the ruse would be over. No ambulance, Matthew. You know how terrible my insurance is out of state. I can't afford an emergency room bill down here. I can't. Eleanor, don't be ridiculous. Jessica's voice came through, loud and authoritative. If you're having a heart attack, you need a hospital. It's not a heart attack, I panted, gripping my chest. It's my angina. The doctor warned me this might happen if I got too stressed or fatigued. I forgot my nitroglycerin pills. I left them in the medicine cabinet in Ohio. I thought I packed them. Mom, you can't drive back to Ohio like this, Matthew shouted over the sound of his engine roaring as he sped back toward my location. I have to, I insisted, my voice trembling perfectly. I won't go to a strange hospital. I want my own doctor. I want to go home. If you call an ambulance, I will refuse treatment, Matthew. I swear to you, I will refuse it. There was a heavy, loaded silence on the other end of the line. I knew exactly what was going through their minds. Their perfect, airtight plan was unraveling. They needed me to quietly, willingly walk into the Oak Haven facility. A dramatic medical emergency on the side of the highway, involving state troopers and paramedics, would draw entirely too much official attention. It could trigger an investigation. It could delay the paperwork. Okay, just stay put, Matthew finally conceded, his voice thick with frustration and barely suppressed rage. We're almost to you. 4 minutes later, the silver luxury SUV came tearing down the opposite side of the highway, executed a sharp, illegal U-turn kicking up dirt and gravel, and pulled up directly behind my parked car. I watched them in my rearview mirror. Matthew threw his door open and sprinted toward my car, his face pale and sweating. Jessica followed closely behind, her jaw set in a hard, furious line. I unlocked the doors and slumped against the driver's side window, keeping one hand pressed firmly against my chest, my eyes half closed. Matthew yanked my door open. Mom, look at me. How is the pain? It's a dull ache now, I whispered, forcing a look of frail vulnerability onto my face. But my vision is blurry. I feel so weak, Matthew. I'm so sorry to ruin the trip. I'm so sorry. It's fine, he lied, though his eyes were darting frantically around the empty highway, desperately calculating his crumbling timeline. We'll find a local clinic. Just let a doctor look at you. No, I cut him off, my voice weak but carrying the stubbornness of an old woman set in her ways. I want to go home. I need my pills. I'll drive slowly. I just need you to follow me. Eleanor, this is absurd, Jessica snapped, leaning into the car, her expensive perfume clashing with the dusty highway air. She glanced suspiciously at the passenger seat. Her gray tote bag sat exactly where she had left it, perfectly untouched. She exhaled a tiny, almost imperceptible sigh of relief. You are in no condition to drive 10 hours back to Ohio. We are less than an hour from the resort. Just let us get you there. The resort. She was still playing the game. Even standing on the side of the road, watching her mother-in-law fake a cardiac event, she was relentlessly trying to push me toward the cage. Jessica, please, I whimpered, looking up at her with tear-filled eyes. If I pass out at the wheel, I'll crash. I just want to go home to my own bed. If you don't want to follow me, I understand. I'll call the highway patrol to escort me. They have paramedics who can give me oxygen while I drive. That was the checkmate. The absolute last thing they wanted was the Georgia State Patrol running my plates and asking questions on the side of the road. Matthew and Jessica exchanged a long, panicked look over the roof of my car. An entire silent conversation happened in the span of 3 seconds. They had no choice. To force me now would be kidnapping. They had to retreat, regroup, and try again when I was back in Ohio and vulnerable. Fine, Matthew gritted out, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Fine, we'll follow you back. But if you start swerving, Mom, I'm pulling you over and calling 911, and I don't care what you say. Thank you, sweetheart, I murmured, reaching out to pat his arm with a trembling hand. The contact made my skin crawl, but I forced a grateful smile. I knew you'd take care of me. He closed my door. I watched them walk back to their SUV. Jessica was gesturing wildly, clearly furious, her face flushed with anger. Matthew just looked defeated. I put the car in drive, signaled, and pulled slowly back onto the highway, heading north, heading home. As I watched their silver SUV pull out behind me in the rearview mirror, The frail, trembling facade I had worn for the last 10 minutes instantly vanished. I sat up perfectly straight. I gripped the steering wheel with firm, steady hands. The 10-hour drive back to Ohio was silent, save for the hum of the tires on the asphalt. But my mind was a loud, chaotic war room. I was calculating every move, every legal maneuver, every counterattack. They thought they were following a broken, confused old woman who had narrowly escaped a tragic medical episode. They thought they had simply lost a day, that they could trick me into signing those papers next week when I was resting in my own home. They didn't realize they were following a ghost. The loving, naive mother they had taken advantage of for 5 years was dead on that Georgia highway, and the woman driving this car back to Ohio was going to burn their entire world to the ground. The drive back to Ohio was an agonizing exercise in restraint. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, the headlights of Matthew's luxury SUV burned into my retinas, a constant glowing reminder of the betrayal following me home. I drove exactly 3 miles under the speed limit the entire way. I kept my posture hunched slightly over the steering wheel, leaning into the role of the frail, exhausted mother I needed them to believe I was. We crossed the state line back into Ohio just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the highway. My chest didn't hurt. My heart was beating with a steady, furious rhythm. When we finally pulled into my quiet suburban neighborhood, the streetlights were buzzing to life. I turned into my driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under my tires bringing a wave of profound relief, immediately followed by a sharp spike of adrenaline. Matthew parked directly behind me. I took a deep breath, composed my face into an expression of weary gratitude, and slowly opened my car door. I made sure my hands were visibly trembling as I reached for my purse. Matthew was at my door in seconds, his face tight with forced concern. "Mom, let me help you inside. How are you feeling?" "Better, Matthew," I whispered, leaning heavily on his arm as I stood up. The physical contact made my stomach churn, but I patted his hand affectionately. "Just so incredibly tired. The pain is gone, but the exhaustion, it's deep in my bones." Jessica stepped out of the passenger side of the SUV, carrying her slate gray designer tote. She didn't look at me. Her jaw was clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might crack. She marched up the front steps to the porch without a word. "I'll get you inside, get you some water, and then we're calling your doctor first thing Monday morning," Matthew said, his tone adopting that patronizing, authoritative edge I had come to detest. "Okay, sweetheart," I murmured compliantly. We reached the front door. Jessica was standing there, staring at the brass handle. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a shiny new brass key, and slid it into the deadbolt. Click. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, flipping on the entryway light. I stopped dead on the welcome mat. The air in my lungs froze. I looked at the lock. It was a brand new quick-set deadbolt, gleaming under the porch light. It was not the weathered Schlager lock David and I had installed 15 years ago. My eyes darted to Matthew. He caught my look, and for a fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed across his face before he quickly masked it with a smooth, practiced smile. "Oh, Mom, I meant to tell you," he said smoothly, stepping past me to hold the door open. "While you were packing the other day, I noticed your front door lock was sticking terribly. It wasn't safe. I had a locksmith come out yesterday afternoon and install a high-security deadbolt for you. I was going to surprise you with the new keys at the resort." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, freshly cut brass key, pressing it into my hand. A chilling realization washed over me, colder than the Ohio night air. They hadn't just planned to lock me away. They had proactively secured their prize before I was even gone. They had changed the locks on my own house, ensuring that if my vacation went exactly as they planned, their newly formed LLC would already have absolute physical control of the property. The key he handed me wasn't a gift. It was a prop in a play that was rapidly falling apart. "That was very thoughtful of you, Matthew," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I curled my fingers tightly around the cold metal key, digging the jagged edges into my palm to ground myself. "Anything for you, Mom," he said, guiding me into the living room. "Now sit down. You need to rest." He helped me into my floral armchair. Jessica was already in the kitchen, aggressively running the faucet and slamming cabinet doors. She emerged a moment later with a glass of water, practically shoving it into my hand. "Drink," she commanded. We need to get on the road. We have to pick Leo up from the sitter, and it's late. You're leaving? I asked, forcing a weak, confused tone. You need quiet, Mom, Matthew said quickly, shooting a warning look at his wife. You need to sleep. We'll be back tomorrow morning to check on you and make that doctor's appointment. Do you want me to help you up to bed? No, I sighed, taking a small sip of water. I think I'll just sit here for a while. Catch my breath. Okay, keep your phone next to you. If you feel any pain at all, you call 911 immediately. Understand? I understand, I lied. They practically ran out the door. The moment the new deadbolt clicked shut, I sat in the silent, empty house and listened to their SUV speed away down the street. I didn't move for 10 full minutes, making absolutely certain they weren't circling the block. When I was sure I was alone, the frail old woman vanished. I stood up, walked briskly to the front window, and closed the curtains tight. I moved through the house, shutting every blind and locking every secondary door. I was operating with a terrifying, singular focus. My first stop was David's old study. I unlocked the heavy oak filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out a thick accordion folder labeled Estate Documents. I needed the original deed to the house, my actual medical records from my last physical proving I was in perfect cognitive health, and the contact information for my financial advisor. I stuffed the entire folder into a sturdy canvas tote bag. Next, I went to the kitchen and grabbed my emergency cash envelope from its hiding spot behind the flour canister, $500 in crisp 20s. Then I sat at the kitchen island, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in over a year. Arthur Vance was a bulldog of an attorney. He had been David's best friend since college and had handled every legal matter for our family since the 1980s. He was 70 years old, sharp as a tack, and notoriously ruthless when crossed. He answered on the third ring. Eleanor? Good Lord, woman, it's 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. Are you all right? Arthur, I said, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. I need you, immediately. The tone of my voice must have alarmed him, because the gruffness instantly vanished. Are you hurt? Do I need to call the police? Not yet, I replied. But I will. Arthur, Matthew, and Jessica just tried to commit me to a locked psychiatric ward in Georgia. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Say that again. They forged a power of attorney. They forged a quitclaim deed transferring my house to an LLC. They paid a doctor in Atlanta to write a fake evaluation stating I have advanced Alzheimer's. I have photographs of all the documents. They think I had a cardiac event on the highway, and they are coming back tomorrow morning to try and finish the job. I heard a sharp intake of breath. When Arthur spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. Eleanor, lock your doors. Do not let them inside if they come back tonight. I am driving to your house right now. I will be there in 20 minutes. The front door lock, I interrupted. They changed the front door lock today while I was gone. They gave me a key, but I don't know who else has one. Son of a bitch, Arthur growled. All right, keep the deadbolt locked, but put the chain on too. I'm leaving now. The next 3 hours were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering executed at my kitchen table. Arthur arrived looking exactly like the formidable litigator he was, dressed in slacks and a wrinkled button-down, carrying a battered leather briefcase. I airdropped the 40 photographs I had taken on the highway to his iPad. We sat in silence as he meticulously scrolled through the evidence, the forged signatures, the LLC registration, the fraudulent medical report. With every swipe of his finger, his jaw tightened further. When he reached the quitclaim deed, he stopped, zooming in on the signature. He looked up at me, his eyes blazing with a protective fury I hadn't seen since David died. Eleanor, he said slowly, this isn't just elder abuse. This is felony fraud, forgery, and attempted kidnapping across state lines. They are looking at significant federal prison time if we hand this over to the DA. I know, I said, my voice eerily calm. I want them ruined, Arthur. I want every single thing they tried to take from me protected, and I want them behind bars. Arthur leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the table. Here is the problem. Right now, we only have photographs of the documents. We need the originals to ensure an airtight criminal conviction. They have the originals in that designer bag. If we call the police now, Matthew will destroy those papers the second he sees a squad car. So how do we get them? A slow, predatory smile spread across Arthur's face. We don't go to them. We let them come to us. You said they think you're vulnerable, Resting and preparing for a doctor's appointment tomorrow? Yes. Then we let them play their hand. They are desperate, Eleanor. They know the clock is ticking on their forged medical report. They are going to try and force you to sign something legally binding while they think you are physically weak and disoriented. They will likely bring a notary public, probably a shady one they've paid off, to your house tomorrow to legitimize the transfer. Arthur pulled out his phone. I'm calling Detective Miller at the precinct. He's a good man, helped me nail a corrupt nursing home administrator 2 years ago. We are going to set a trap. Sunday morning dawned bright and bitterly cold. I had barely slept, fueled by a potent mix of adrenaline and sheer, unadulterated rage. At 9 a.m., Arthur arrived through the back door, accompanied by Detective Miller and a uniformed officer. The police parked their cruiser 2 streets over to avoid suspicion. They reviewed the photographs, took my official statement, and set up in the guest bedroom down the hall, keeping the door cracked just enough to hear the living room. At 10:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my cardigan, and walked to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open. Matthew stood on the porch, holding a large tray of coffees and pastries. Jessica was right behind him, tightly clutching the gray designer tote against her chest. Next to them stood a small, nervous-looking man in a cheap suit, carrying a leather folio. "Morning, Mom," Matthew said brightly, stepping inside as if he owned the place. "How are you feeling?" "We brought breakfast." "I'm still very weak, Matthew," I said softly, stepping back to let them in. I kept my eyes fixed on the gray tote bag. "Well, you just sit down," Jessica ordered, her voice clipped and professional. She gestured to the nervous man in the suit. "Eleanor, this is Mr. Davies. He's a mobile notary." "A notary?" I asked, feigning utter confusion as I lowered myself into my armchair. "Why do we need a notary on a Sunday morning?" Matthew set the coffees down on the table, his smile faltering slightly. He pulled up a chair directly across from me, leaning in close, invading my space. "Mom, after yesterday's scare, Jessica and I stayed up all night talking," he began, his voice dripping with fabricated sincerity. "We are terrified for you. Your health is clearly deteriorating faster than we thought. The doctor's appointment tomorrow is just the first step, but we need to make sure you are protected financially if something worse happens. If you have another heart attack, or if your memory starts to fail, the state could step in and freeze your assets." "The state?" I gasped, clutching my chest. "Yes," Jessica cut in smoothly, unzipping the gray tote. She pulled out the thick manila folder labeled Financial/Estate and laid it on the coffee table. "We had our lawyer draft some emergency documents. It's just a standard power of attorney and a property transfer to a family trust. It ensures Matthew can pay your medical bills and manage the house if you become incapacitated. Mr. Davies is just here to witness your signature." She pulled a silver pen from her purse and held it out to me. The quitclaim deed, the very same forged document I had photographed yesterday, was placed in front of me. They were so arrogant. They were so utterly convinced of my stupidity and compliance that they were trying to legitimize their forgery by forcing me to sign a second copy of the same fraudulent document right in front of a notary. "I don't understand," I stammered, looking frantically between Matthew and the paper. "Transfer the house? But this is my home." "It will still be your home, Mom," Matthew lied smoothly, his hand covering mine on the table. "It's just paperwork. It's for your own good. Just sign it and we can all relax." I think I need to read it first," I whispered. "Eleanor, there is no time," Jessica snapped, her patience completely evaporating. The vicious, entitled woman beneath the facade was bleeding through. "Mr. Davies charges by the hour. We are trying to protect you. Stop being difficult and just sign the paper." I looked at the silver pen in my trembling hand. I looked at my son, whose eyes were hard and completely devoid of empathy. I looked at Jessica, practically salivating over the deed to my home. The performance was over. I dropped the pen on the table. The sharp clack echoed in the quiet room. I sat back in my chair, the trembling completely vanishing from my hands. I looked Matthew dead in the eye, my voice dropping an octave, cold and flat as a frozen lake. "No." Matthew blinked, entirely taken aback by the sudden shift in my tone. "Mom, what are you doing? Just sign." "I said no, Matthew," I interrupted, my voice slicing through the room like a razor. "I will not sign away my home to fund your pathetic, desperate lifestyle. And I will certainly not be checking into the Oak Haven Restorative Care Facility." The color completely drained from Matthew's face. He looked as if I had physically struck him. Jessica gasped, stumbling backward a step, clutching her purse. "The notary, mister." Davies looked wildly between us, clearly sensing he had walked into a minefield. I don't know what you're talking about," Matthew stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "Mom, your mind is playing tricks on you. This is exactly why we need you to sign." "Stop lying to me!" I roared, standing up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "I opened the bag on the highway, Matthew. I saw the forged deed. I saw the fake Alzheimer's diagnosis from Dr. Thorne. I know exactly what you plan to do to me." Panic, raw and unfiltered, erupted in the room. Jessica lunged forward, grabbing the manila folder off the table. "Matthew, get her phone. She might have called someone," she shrieked. "You're too late, Jessica," a deep, booming voice announced. The door to the hallway swung open. Arthur Vance stepped into the living room, his face an absolute mask of fury. Right behind him were Detective Miller and the uniformed officer, their hands resting on their duty belts. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, suffocating terror. "Matthew and Jessica Hughes," Detective Miller said, stepping forward, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You are both under arrest for elder financial abuse, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud." "No!" Jessica screamed, dropping the folder. The papers scattered across the floor. "No, this is a mistake. She's crazy. She has dementia. Look at the medical report." "We've seen the report, Mrs. Hughes," Arthur said coldly, stepping forward to pick up the scattered documents. "We've also spoken to Dr. Thorne in Atlanta this morning. Funny thing about corrupt doctors, they tend to cooperate with law enforcement very quickly when threatened with losing their medical license. He confessed to accepting a $10,000 wire transfer from your joint account to fabricate the evaluation without ever examining my client." Matthew collapsed into the chair I had just vacated, his hands covering his face. A low, pathetic moan escaped his lips. The uniformed officer moved swiftly, pulling Matthew's hands behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut was the loudest, most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my life. As Detective Miller moved to handcuff Jessica, she completely unraveled. "Don't touch me!" she shrieked, backing away until she hit the wall. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, desperate manipulation. "Eleanor, please call them off," she sobbed, dropping to her knees on my living room rug. "I'm pregnant. I'm 3 months pregnant with your second grandchild. You can't send me to prison. The stress will kill the baby. Please, I beg you." The room froze. I stared down at the woman who, 24 hours ago, was actively trying to lock me in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my life. I felt a brief, terrifying tug on my heartstrings. A new baby. Another grandchild. The instinct to protect, to forgive, surged forward. But before I could even process the manipulation, Matthew lifted his head from his handcuffed hands. His face was streaked with tears, his eyes hollow and defeated. "Stop it, Jessica," he whispered. "Shut up, Matthew. Tell her," Jessica screamed at him. "She's not pregnant, Mom," Matthew said, his voice breaking. He couldn't look at me. He stared at the floorboards. "She got her tubes tied 3 years ago. She's lying." Jessica let out an animalistic shriek of fury, lunging at her husband. But Detective Miller caught her arm, swiftly wrestling her hands behind her back and securing the cuffs. "Why, Matthew?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The anger was fading, replaced by a profound, echoing sadness. "Why did you do this? I gave you everything. I practically bankrupted myself for you. Why was it never enough?" Matthew let out a ragged sob. "Because I lost it all, Mom. I lost the house. I lost my job. I lost everything. I started day trading crypto with the money you gave us. I thought I could make it back. I thought I could be the provider Jessica wanted. I leveraged everything. The cars, the mortgage. I even emptied Leo's college fund." My breath caught in my throat. "Leo's college fund? The account David set up before he died?" Matthew nodded miserably. "It's gone. We owe over $400,000. The bank is foreclosing next week. The people I borrowed from, they aren't the bank, Mom. They threatened Jessica. They threatened Leo. The equity in your house was the only way out. It was my idea. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stared at the broken, weeping man sitting in handcuffs in my living room. I didn't see my son anymore. I saw a stranger who had gambled away his family's safety, his son's future, and his mother's freedom, all because he was too much of a coward to face the consequences of his own vanity. "Take them away, detective," I said quietly, turning my back on them. "Mom, please, don't let them take me," Matthew screamed as the officers hauled him to his feet. "What about Leo? Who is going to take care of Leo?" I turned back to look at him one last time. "I will," I said softly, my voice filled with an absolute, unshakable certainty. "I will raise my grandson. And I promise you, Matthew, I will teach him how to be a better man than his father." The front door closed behind them. The house was finally, truly silent. The legal aftermath was swift and devastating for them. Matthew and Jessica both pled guilty to multiple felony charges to avoid a lengthy trial. They were sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary. The LLC they created was dissolved, and my house, my assets, and my future were secured. I petitioned for, and was immediately granted, full permanent custody of Leo. It took time for the trauma to settle. It took time for Leo to understand why his parents weren't coming home, and it took time for me to heal the deep, jagged wounds of betrayal, but we did it together. Today, my house is no longer quiet. It is filled with the sounds of an 8-year-old boy practicing the piano, the smell of fresh cookies baking in the oven, and the comforting weight of a life lived authentically, without the crushing burden of parasitic demands. I am 66 years old now. I sit in my floral armchair, not looking at a designer bag, but watching my grandson build a magnificent fortress out of Legos on the living room rug. I learned the hardest lesson a mother can ever learn. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional compliance. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your children is to let them fall, to let them face the fire they set themselves. And sometimes the only way to save your family is to relentlessly, unapologetically save yourself first.